You are sitting in your kitchen right now. The thermometer on the wall reads 89 degrees. The window unit is grinding away in the next room, and you already know what next month's bill is going to look like. You keep telling yourself this is just the price of living in America in the summer. It isn't. In a barn outside Millersburg, Ohio, sits a $15 bucket. It cools an Amish bedroom to 72 degrees every summer night for 43 years straight. No compressor, no refrigerant, no electric bill, just water, salt, and one piece of cotton cloth. The same setup the Amish were using in 1881, 21 years before the first air conditioner was ever built. And the reason your grandfather never told you about it is sitting in a document from 1931 I will show you in a minute. The first time I saw it work, I was standing barefoot on a pine floor outside Millersburg, watching an old man named Atlee pour well water into something that looked like a milk pail. He looked at me the way an old man looks at a son who should have been told something a long time ago. He said, "Eli, your grandfather knew this. Somebody made sure you didn't. I am going to show you exactly how that bucket works. Why it has been deliberately written out of every cooling guide published in this country since 1931, and a single overnight variation pulled from a Pennsylvania household ledger dated 1847 that drops bedroom temperature another 9 degrees while you sleep. This works in the house you already own tonight. No remodel, no permit, no contractor, no check to anybody." Let me take you back to that kitchen in Holmes County, because the bucket itself is almost insultingly simple, and that is exactly why nobody believes it until they feel it. Atlee had a standard galvanized pail, 3 gallons, the kind you can still buy at any farm supply store for under $15. Inside the bucket was well water, drawn that morning, sitting at about 54 degrees because the well casing reaches down into the same ground temperature zone the Amish have been exploiting for 200 years. Wrapped around the outside of the bucket, top to bottom, was a piece of unbleached cotton muslin, the kind Amish women use for flour sacks and pillowcases. The bottom edge of that muslin was sitting in a shallow tin tray of the same well water. Capillary action does the rest. The fabric stays wet from bottom to top, 24 hours a day, without anyone touching it. Behind the bucket, on a small wooden stand, was a battery-operated fan no bigger than a dinner plate, 8 inches across, the kind that runs 60 hours on 4 D-cell batteries. That fan pushed room air across the wet muslin, and what came out the other side was air that measured, on Atlee's old porch thermometer, exactly 68 degrees. The room was 86. That is an 18-degree drop, sustained, for 8 hours, on a single bucket of water. The physics is something you already know. If you have ever stepped out of a swimming pool on a windy day and started shivering even though the air temperature was in the 90s, water evaporating off your skin steals heat. It steals an enormous amount of heat. To turn 1 gram of water into vapor, you need 540 calories of energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. It comes from the air passing over the wet fabric. That air arrives warm and dry, and it leaves cool and slightly humid. The bucket is doing nothing more than borrowing a law of thermodynamics that was old when the pharaohs were young. Egyptian wall paintings from the reign of Pharaoh Sneferu, dated to roughly 2600 BC, show servants fanning porous clay water jars to cool the air for nobility. The Persians refined it. The Moors carried it into Spain. German Anabaptists carried it across the Atlantic in the 1720s, packed in the same wooden trunks that brought their Bibles and their seed corn. The Amish never stopped using it. The rest of America forgot on purpose. And the reason they forgot is not because the bucket stopped working. The bucket still works exactly as well today as it did when Atlee's great-grandfather set the first one on a kitchen floor in 1881. But here is where the story stops being charming and starts getting uncomfortable. In 1931, the American Society of Heating and Ventilating Engineers published the first edition of what would eventually become the standard reference manual for residential cooling in this country. The ASHV Guide, 1931 edition, page 247 of my copy, which I keep in a drawer in my office in Goshen, contains, on a page most homeowners have never seen, a formal classification of evaporative cooling as, and I am quoting now, a primitive method unsuitable for modern domestic application. The phrase was written by a committee. That committee included 3 men who held patents on mechanical refrigeration components. One of them was a direct employee of the Carrier Engineering Corporation. The same Willis Carrier whose machine had been invented in 1,902 inches of Brooklyn printing plant, and that machine, you should know, was never designed to cool human beings. Carrier built it to control humidity for color printing on glossy paper. He said so himself in his memoir. But by the late 1920s, his company had realized something the rest of us are only catching up to now. A machine you have to keep buying refrigerant for, replacing compressors on, paying an electric bill to run, and eventually throwing in a landfill after 15 years. That machine is a permanent customer. A bucket of water is not. So the bucket had to be made to look stupid. It had to be classified as primitive. It had to be left out of every home economics textbook printed after 1935. By 1952, the U.S. Department of Commerce was actively promoting mechanical air conditioning as a measure of national modernity, and any homeowner still using evaporative methods was treated, in the language of the federal pamphlets I have read with my own eyes, in the Lancaster County Archive, as living in conditions of rural backwardness. That is the word they used, backwardness. For a system that uses 0.5% of the electricity of a window unit and cannot break down because there is nothing inside it that can break. The Amish read those pamphlets. They were handed out at every county fair in Pennsylvania between 1948 and 1961. The Amish nodded politely, took the pamphlets home, and used them to start the morning fire. Then they kept filling their buckets. They watched their English neighbors sign 30-year mortgages and 20-year electric contracts to cool houses that were no cooler than theirs. They watched the cooling industry grow into a $40 billion machine in this country alone. And they said nothing, because saying anything was not their way. The knowledge sat there, in plain view, on every Amish kitchen floor for 90 years, while America paid for the privilege of forgetting it. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you, and it is the part I wish someone had shown me 20 years ago when I was still writing checks to the power company every August for an air handler that sounded like a tractor with a broken belt. You do not need to retrofit anything. You do not need to drill into a wall. You do not need a contractor, a permit, an inspector, or a single nail. What you need is one galvanized bucket, 3 yards of unbleached cotton muslin, a shallow metal tray, a small battery-operated fan, and a bedroom door that closes. That is the entire list. Total cost. The last time I priced it at a farm store outside New Holland, Pennsylvania, was $14.86. Here is exactly how you set it up tonight. Place the bucket on a small wooden stool, or an upturned crate, 6 to 8 inches off the floor. This matters because warm air settles low and the fan needs to draw from the warmer layer to maximize the temperature differential. Fill the bucket 3/4 full with the coldest water you can get from your tap, ideally drawn after the line has been running for 30 seconds. If you have a well, use well water. If you have city water, run it until it stops feeling lukewarm. Wrap the muslin around the bucket so it covers the entire outside surface, top to bottom, with the bottom 4 inches of fabric draped down into the tray. Pour an additional inch of water into the tray. The fabric will pull water up the sides of the bucket within about 15 minutes through plain capillary action. You will see a dark, wet line climb the cloth like a slow tide. Position the fan 12 to 18 inches behind the bucket, blowing across the wet surface toward the bed. That is it. That is the entire installation. The room will begin dropping in temperature within 40 minutes. By the second hour, if your bedroom is reasonably sealed, door closed, curtains drawn, no draft from a hallway, you will see a measured drop of 12 to 20 degrees depending on the humidity outside. Before you build it, let me answer the questions I already know you are asking. The first is whether this works in dry climates like Phoenix or Tucson or West Texas. The answer is yes, and in fact it works better there than anywhere else. The drier the outside air, the bigger the drop. People in Arizona and eastern Oregon and most of Nevada have reported drops of nearly 30 degrees. In humid Florida or along the Gulf Coast, the drop is smaller, around 8 to 10 degrees, which is still the difference between sleeping and lying awake in a sweat. For humid climates, The Amish in Sarasota, and there has been a substantial Amish and Mennonite community there since 1927, figured out the adaptation almost a century ago. They use 2 buckets instead of 1, placed on opposite walls, and they hang a third damp sheet between them like a curtain. The air moving between the 2 buckets picks up cooling from both sides, and the hanging sheet acts as a third evaporative surface. A man named Amos Byler, who is 78 years old and runs a furniture shop on Bahia Vista Street, demonstrated this to me in July of 2022 inches, a wood frame house with no air conditioning, in 91-degree heat with 78% humidity, and the interior of his sitting room measured 76 degrees on my thermometer. His electric bill that month was $31. To put a number on it, a standard galvanized bucket holding 2.5 gallons of well water at 54 degrees, wrapped in a cotton flour sack soaked in the same water, placed in a room of 800 cubic feet at a starting temperature of 84 degrees and a relative humidity of 40%, will reduce that room's temperature to approximately 71 degrees over the course of 6 to 8 hours. I ran this test myself in a spare bedroom in my own house in late August of last year with a calibrated thermometer and a hygrometer from a hardware store in Goshen, Indiana, and I have the handwritten log on my desk as I record this. The second question is mold. If you keep a damp cloth in a room for weeks on end without ever drying it out or washing it, yes, you can grow mildew. The solution is the one Magdalena Stoltzfus wrote down in her 1847 ledger. You take the cloth down every morning, you hang it in the sun for 2 hours, the ultraviolet light kills every spore, and you put it back up at sundown. Total labor, 3 minutes. The third question is large houses. That is a real limitation. A single bucket cools a single room. The Amish accept this. They cool the rooms people are in, and they let the rest of the house be whatever temperature it wants to be. The idea that every cubic foot of a house must be 68 degrees at all times is a marketing invention from the Carrier Corporation in the 1950s, and it is the single most expensive idea ever sold to the American homeowner. The fourth question is nighttime. Evaporation does slow at night because the air is cooler, but the room is also cooler at night, so you need less cooling. By 3 in the morning, the bucket has done about 70% of its work, and the outside air has dropped 15 or 20 degrees on its own. You wake up at 6 in a 68-degree bedroom, take the cloth down, refill the bucket from the well, and start over at sundown. 6% of every kilowatt hour produced in this country goes to air conditioning. That is $37 billion that American households pay every summer to keep their homes cooler than the outside air. The Amish pay almost none of it. Before I show you the salt trick from Magdalena's 1847 ledger, one quick thing. Everything I have been pulling out of these Amish farmhouses, the $15 bucket that cools a bedroom to 72 degrees for 43 summers straight, the Age V guide, page 247, that classified this as primitive backwardness to protect a patent portfolio, the Sarasota 2-bucket adaptation, the how-to you just heard, the lime wash thermal wall coating from the wall video, the ginger bug and the long bug from the ferment video, the 21 vinegar uses, the 15 borax uses, the 20 Depression era money secrets, and all the other pieces I have pulled out of Lancaster County and Holmes County over the years. I have put it all in one place, room by room, season by season, in the order the families actually use it. It is called the Amish Home System. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what Magdalena wrote on page 41 of that 1847 ledger about the salt bucket drops a bedroom another 9 degrees and holds it there until morning. But there is one more layer to this, and it is the layer that turns a good system into something almost unfair. The Amish women I sat with in a kitchen near Berlin, Ohio, 2 summers ago showed me what they called the night water. It is not in any modern guide. I have looked. It is not on the internet. I have looked there too. It exists in handwritten Pennsylvania German household ledgers passed mother to daughter, and the one I was allowed to photograph, dated June 1847 and signed by a woman named Magdalena Stoltzfus, contains an entire half page on what she calls the salt bucket for the hottest nights. Magdalena writes that a handful of plain table salt, about a 1/4 cup for a 3-gallon pail added to the bucket water, along with 3 or 4 ice chips from the ice house, lowers the freezing point of the surface water on the muslin and allows evaporation to continue at a higher rate even as the bucket itself grows colder. The science was unknown to her. She did not need it. She knew it worked. Modern thermodynamics confirms it precisely. Saline water evaporates at a lower energy threshold and stays liquid at temperatures where fresh water would begin to surface freeze in a dry breeze. The result? Measured on Atlee's porch thermometer the night he showed me air coming off the muslin at 59 degrees, the room dropped to 67 by midnight and held there until almost 5 in the morning. He never opened a window, he never touched a switch. He slept under a quilt in August. You will not find Magdalena Stoltzfus's name in any cooling textbook. You will not find her recipe in any extension service bulletin. The 1,931 committee did not bother to suppress her, because they never knew she existed. She was a 31-year-old farm wife, writing in a language most Americans cannot read, in a script most archivists cannot decipher, in a ledger that sat in a cedar trunk in a farmhouse attic in Lancaster County for 176 years, until a great-great-granddaughter named Rebecca finally let an outsider take photographs of the pages. I am the outsider she let in. The ledger is real. I have held it. Her entry from July 19th of that same summer describes setting 2 cedar buckets in the north window of the keeping room before sundown, draping them with linen sheets dampened in spring water, and reporting the next morning that the cream had not turned, the butter held its shape, and her husband Eli slept through the night without throwing off the quilt. She lists the cost of the operation as nothing. She lists the labor as 4 minutes. She makes a small note in the margin that reads, in the Pennsylvania Dutch shorthand she used, something close to, "The English neighbors marvel and will not try it." That sentence has stayed with me for a year. The English neighbors marvel and will not try it. Even in 1847, the cultural barrier was already there. The salt trick is the secret the cooling industry never had to bury because they never even knew it was there to bury. Here is how you do it tonight. Take your bucket, set up exactly as I described, add 1/4 cup of plain table salt, not iodized, not sea salt, just the cheapest box of Morton's you can find at the grocery store. Stir it in until it dissolves completely. If you have an ice cube tray in your freezer, drop in 6 or 8 cubes after the salt has dissolved. The cubes will last about 90 minutes before melting, but during that 90 minutes, the muslin will be discharging air at temperatures Atlee measured between 56 and 61 degrees. The salt continues working long after the ice is gone, because the brine concentration in the cloth keeps the evaporation rate elevated through the entire night. By morning, the bucket will still be cool to the touch. The muslin will still be wet, the room will still be holding 70 degrees. You will have used 0 kilowatt hours. You will have spent, including the salt, about 90 cents of consumable material. There is something the Amish understand that the rest of us have spent a century unlearning. They understand that comfort is not a product, it is a practice. It is something you set up before bed, the way you lock the door, the way you check on the children, the way you bank the fire in winter. It costs almost nothing, because the people who designed it were not trying to sell you anything. They were trying to sleep. If you are the kind of person who still believes that real knowledge, the kind that works in your hands, in your house, this weekend has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's quarterly earnings report, then you already know what comes next. You build the bucket. You add the salt. Tell me in the comments what state you are in, what you paid for cooling last August, and whether you have access to well water or will be using city tap. I read every single one, and the next video depends on what you ask me. Subscribe if you have not yet. Next week, I am opening up the Pennsylvania Ledger again, and I'm going to show you the page Magdalena wrote about keeping butter and milk cold for 9 days in August without any ice at all, using nothing but a clay pot, a damp cloth, and a corner of the cellar you already have under your house. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and remember the ground under your house has been 55 degrees for 10,000 years. Everything you need to be free of the cooling bill is already inside your home or within $15 of it. Sleep cool tonight. I will see you in the next one.